Hello, children. How are you all? I hope you all are taking care of your health and your families. Proceeding with our studies, let's move on to the third video of Chapter 5 Pollination and Fertilization. In the previous two videos, you had learned completely about pollination. Today, we'll discuss about the second step of reproduction process in plants, that is fertilization. Fertilization is defined as the union or fusion of the nuclei of male and female gametes. Here is a structure of a bisexual flower. You are very much familiar with it. The male part stamen and female part carpel. The male part has got anther with pollen sacs. Inside the pollen sacs are pollen grains. Pollen grains produce male gamete. Ovule, which is present inside the ovary of carpel, produces female gamete. It is the fusion of these two gametes which completes the process of fertilization. Before we understand the process, let's first understand the structure of a mature pollen grain. A mature pollen grain contains three main parts. The outermost protective covering is two-walled. The outer wall is exine, which is thick and rough. The inner wall is a smooth, thin wall called as intine. Inside the pollen grain are two nuclei. This is tube nucleus, which helps in formation of pollen tube during the germination of a mature pollen grain. This is generative nucleus, which divides to form two male gamete. The third point is called as germ pore. These are points where the pollen tube arises out of pollen grain during its maturity. Here we have the structure of a mature ovule. Ovule grows inside the ovary. It has got four important parts. The outermost protective covering has got one or two layers. It is termed as integuments. Integument is discontinued at a point, leaving a small opening. This opening is termed as micropyle. It is this opening through which the pollen tube enters inside the ovule. Inside the integuments is a portion all around called as nucellus. Nucellus contains food-laden cells. It is this part which provides nutrition to the growing embryo. Inside the nucellus is the embryo sac. Embryo sac contains 7 cells inside it. Embryo sac has got two ends. This end, which is close to the micropyle, is termed as micropylar end, and this end is called as chalazal end. At the micropylar end, embryo sac has 3 cells. You see here in the figure, the larger cell is the egg, and the 2 cells on the either side of egg are called as synergids. Synergids keep the egg in place. At the chalazal end are 3 antipodal cells. At the center of embryo sac is a central cell which contains 2 polar nuclei. Now we move on to the germination process of pollen grain and double fertilization process in a flower. Before we start, one thing to recall is that a pollen grain once reaches on the stigma, it starts its germination process only when the pollen grain and stigma are of the flowers of same species. Now stigma here produces sugar, which stimulates pollen grains to germinate. During germination, the tube nucleus helps in formation of pollen tube and arises out of the germ pore, carrying generative nucleus behind it. As the pollen tube grows little more, the generative nucleus divides into 2 sperm nuclei or male gametes. Now, one more thing to understand here is that how is it that pollen tube keeps passing through the female parts? Pollen tube releases enzymes, and the enzymes keep dissolving cells of stigma, style, and ovary, and thus helps the pollen tube to enter into the ovule. Once pollen tube enters through micropyle inside the ovule, the tube nucleus degenerates because its work is only to form the pollen tube and bring the two male gametes inside the ovule. So once the male gametes reach the ovule through micropyle, pollen tube degenerates. The sperm nuclei, one sperm nuclei here fuses with the egg cell and results in the formation of zygote. This is the first step of fertilization. The second sperm nuclei moves inwards and reaches the central cell. And here it fertilizes with the central cell containing two polar nuclei and results in formation of endosperm. So fertilization is completed in two steps. One sperm nuclei fuses with egg cell to form zygote. Another sperm nuclei combines with two polar nuclei of central cell to form endosperm. So therefore, fertilization in a flower is called as double fertilization. Now, what is triple fusion? In the second step of fertilization, we see that one nucleus of sperm and two nuclei of central cell fuse together. So therefore, it is termed as triple fusion. Triple, three. Fusion of three nuclei. Alright. So let's move on to understand what happens to the floral parts after the fertilization process. Petals, stamens, style and stigma, they fall off. They do not have any role to play after fertilization. Calyx, in many cases, they fall off. In some fruits, they are seen remaining intact in dry form. As you see here in apple, it is also seen in dried form in guava and in many other fruits also. In some cases, they are seen green, as you see here in brinjal. The ovary completely turns into fruit. Ovary wall forms the fruit wall. The fruit wall varies from fruit to fruit. In some cases, it is seen dry and hard. In some cases, they are thick and fleshy. And in some fruits, they are thin, which we can peel off easily. Ovules turn into seeds. Now, this is the fate of floral parts after fertilization. Another important thing to note is that we have seen that fruits vary in the number of seeds present inside it. It is because of the number of ovules present in flower. A flower with single ovule produce single seeded fruit. A flower with many ovules produce many seeded fruit. So thus, seeds vary in fruits because of the number of ovules being different in flowers. With this, we complete today's video. We also have completed the chapter Pollination and Fertilization today. Let's do a quick recap. Today you learnt about the process of fertilization, structure of a mature pollen grain and ovule. You also understood how pollen grain germinates on stigma. You understood why fertilization process in a flower is termed as double fertilization and what happens to the floral parts after fertilization. With this, we come to the end of today's video, children. In the next video, I'll be discussing with you some questions. That's all for today. Thank you and take care.